The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Sergeant William Hayes adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what would be the most emotionally charged day of his 20-year career as a royal guard. The crisp autumn air carried whispers of anticipation from the gathering crowd, all waiting for the unveiling of the magnificent bronze statue that had taken months to complete. This wasn't just any ordinary monument, it was a tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, crafted with meticulous detail to honor her 7 decades of unwavering service to the crown. William had been personally selected by the palace administration to stand guard during the ceremony, a position he considered the highest honor of his career. His weathered hands, which had saluted countless royal processions, trembled slightly as he took his position beside the covered statue. The bronze figure beneath the silk draping represented everything he had sworn to protect and serve throughout his distinguished career in the royal household. The statue itself was a masterpiece of artistic dedication. Renowned sculptor Margaret Thornfield had spent 18 months bringing the Queen's likeness to life, capturing not just her physical appearance but the very essence of her dignity and grace. Every fold of her ceremonial robes, every detail of the crown jewels adorning her figure, and the gentle yet commanding expression on her face had been crafted with reverence and precision. The inscription at the base read simply, "Elizabeth II, a life of service, a legacy of grace." As guests began arriving for the ceremony, William's mind wandered to his own connection with the late Queen. He had served during her final years, witnessing her unwavering commitment to duty even as her health declined. He remembered the quiet moments when she would acknowledge the guards with a subtle nod or gentle smile, small gestures that meant the world to those who dedicated their lives to protecting the royal family. These memories made today's unveiling deeply personal for him. Queen Camilla arrived precisely at noon, accompanied by a small entourage of palace officials and distinguished guests. She wore an elegant navy dress with pearl accessories, her demeanor composed as she approached the ceremony area. The assembled crowd of palace staff, dignitaries, and media representatives fell silent as she took her position before the covered statue. William stood at attention, his years of training keeping him perfectly still despite the emotions swirling within him. The ceremony began with a brief speech from the palace chaplain, offering prayers for the late Queen's soul and blessing the memorial that would serve as a lasting tribute to her legacy. Lord Chamberlain then stepped forward to provide historical context about the Queen's reign, highlighting her dedication to public service and her role as a stabilizing force during times of national uncertainty. The words echoed across the courtyard, creating an atmosphere of solemn reverence. As the moment for the unveiling approached, Queen Camilla stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. Her words were carefully chosen, speaking of continuity, tradition, and the importance of honoring the past while looking toward the future. She spoke of her predecessor's remarkable legacy and the responsibility that came with maintaining the standards she had set. The crowd listened respectfully, understanding the significance of this moment in royal history. William felt a surge of pride as he listened to the speech, remembering his own years of service under Queen Elizabeth II. He had witnessed her strength during difficult times, her compassion for those in need, and her unwavering dedication to her role as monarch. The statue represented not just a person, but an institution, a way of life that had shaped British society for generations. His eyes remained fixed ahead, but his heart was filled with memories of a remarkable woman who had earned the respect and admiration of millions. The crowd stirred with anticipation as Queen Camilla approached the golden cord that would release the silk covering. Photographers positioned themselves for the perfect shot, while palace staff ensured every detail of the ceremony proceeded smoothly. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees surrounding the courtyard, creating a natural soundtrack for this historic moment. William's breathing deepened as he prepared to witness the unveiling of what he considered a sacred tribute. As Queen Camilla's hand reached for the cord, a sense of expectation filled the air. This moment represented the culmination of months of planning, artistic creation, and emotional preparation. For William and his fellow guards, it was an opportunity to pay final respects to a monarch they had served with unwavering loyalty. The statue would stand as a permanent reminder of her presence in this place where she had worked, lived, and shaped the course of British history. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of London traffic and the gentle whisper of wind through the palace gardens. William's military training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing could have prepared him for the emotional weight of this moment. As he stood guard beside what would become a symbol of royal continuity, he felt the full significance of his role in preserving the dignity and honor of the crown. The cord was pulled, and the silk covering began its graceful descent, revealing, inch by inch, the remarkable artistic achievement that would serve as Queen Elizabeth I's lasting memorial within the palace grounds. The crowd held its collective breath as the bronze figure emerged, capturing the late queen in all her regal bearing, a testament to both artistic skill and deep respect for the subject. The moment had arrived that would forever change how this corner of the palace courtyard would be remembered and revered. Thomas reached for his communication device, but before he could activate it, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Chief Security Officer Margaret Reynolds appeared, her expression serious as she approached the unfolding confrontation. Behind her walked 2 additional guards, their presence adding weight to the already tense situation. Margaret had served the royal household for over 20 years, rising through the ranks to become one of the most trusted security officials in the palace. Her sharp eyes took in the scene immediately: the young man in the expensive suit, the questionable authorization document in Thomas's hand, and the obvious standoff between guard and visitor. "What seems to be the problem here?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying the authority of her position. Thomas felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as he explained the situation. "Chief Reynolds, this gentleman is attempting to access the restricted archives. He's presented what appears to be an authorization document, but it doesn't match our standard security protocols." Margaret approached and examined the document Thomas handed her. Her experienced eye caught the same irregularities Thomas had noticed, plus several additional concerns. The paper quality wasn't quite right, and the official seals, while convincing from a distance, showed signs of digital reproduction rather than authentic embossing. The young man watched this examination with growing impatience. His earlier confidence seemed to waver as he realized he was now facing multiple security professionals rather than a single guard who might be intimidated or confused. "I trust this can be resolved quickly," the stranger said, his tone attempting to regain its earlier authority. "I have important research to conduct, and time is of the essence." Margaret looked up from the document, her expression revealing nothing. "Sir, may I ask your name and the nature of your research?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas noticed the young man's hesitation before responding, a brief moment that spoke volumes about his discomfort with direct questioning. "My name is James Parker," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "I'm conducting genealogical research for a private client. The archives contain records that are essential to my work." Margaret's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't buying this explanation. Professional genealogists typically worked through official channels and had legitimate credentials from recognized historical societies or academic institutions. They certainly didn't show up with questionable authorization documents. "Mr. Parker, genealogical research in our archives requires advanced scheduling and approval from the Royal Collection Trust," Margaret explained patiently. "All researchers must provide detailed documentation of their credentials and the specific records they wish to examine. Did you follow these procedures?" The man calling himself James Parker shifted uncomfortably. "There may have been some miscommunication regarding the scheduling. I was told everything had been arranged." Thomas exchanged a meaningful glance with his chief. This was clearly someone attempting to gain unauthorized access to sensitive materials, though his motives remained unclear. The professional demeanor and expensive clothing suggested this wasn't a typical intruder or curious tourist who had wandered into the wrong area. Margaret made a decision that would prove crucial to unraveling the mystery. "Mr. Parker, I'm going to need to verify your credentials and authorization through official channels. Please accompany us to the security office where we can sort this out properly." The stranger's reaction was immediate and telling. His composed facade cracked slightly, revealing underlying anxiety. That really won't be necessary. Perhaps I should return another time when the proper arrangements have been made. He began moving toward the exit, but Margaret's firm voice stopped him. Sir, I'm afraid that's not possible. Palace security protocol requires that we complete our verification process for anyone attempting to access restricted areas. This is for everyone's protection. Thomas positioned himself to block the corridor exit while the other guards flanked the visitor. The young man found himself surrounded, his escape routes effectively cut off. The situation had escalated from a simple document check to a formal security investigation. The walk to the security office passed in tense silence. Thomas noticed how the stranger's eyes darted constantly, taking in every detail of their route as if memorizing the palace layout. This wasn't the behavior of someone conducting innocent research. Once in the security office, Margaret gestured for the visitor to take a seat while she began her investigation. Modern technology made verification relatively quick and within minutes. She had confirmed what they all suspected. No genealogical researcher named James Parker had any scheduled access to the palace archives. Mr. Parker? Margaret said, her tone now openly skeptical. There's no record of any authorization for your visit today. Furthermore, our checks with professional genealogical organizations show no one by your name in their membership databases. The man's carefully constructed story was falling apart, but he maintained his composure with surprising skill. There must be some administrative error. These things happen in large bureaucratic systems. Margaret wasn't finished. She had also run the fake authorization document through analysis software, confirming that several security features were missing or incorrectly replicated. The document was definitely a forgery, though a sophisticated one that suggested professional criminal capabilities. Sir, this authorization document is fraudulent, Margaret stated flatly. The seals are reproductions, the watermarks are missing, and the format doesn't match our current standards. You've attempted to gain unauthorized access to restricted royal archives using false documentation. The accusation hung heavy in the room. Thomas watched the stranger's face carefully, noting how his jaw tightened and his hands clenched slightly. Whatever this man's real identity and motivations, he was clearly prepared for the possibility of discovery. I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding, the visitor replied slowly. Perhaps if I could speak to someone in higher authority, we could resolve this matter more efficiently. Margaret's experience told her this was a stalling tactic, possibly designed to buy time for outside intervention or to create confusion in the chain of command. She decided to press forward with standard protocols. Mr. Parker, or whatever your real name might be, you're currently being detained for attempted unauthorized access to restricted government facilities and the use of fraudulent documentation. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to contact a solicitor. Thomas felt a surge of professional pride as he watched his chief handle the situation with textbook precision. However, something about the visitor's reaction troubled him. Instead of panic or indignation, the man seemed almost resigned, as if he had expected this outcome all along. The stranger leaned back in his chair and looked directly at Margaret. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, less pretense, more authentic authority. Chief Reynolds, before this goes any further, I think you should know who I really am. The conversation you're about to have may require the involvement of people far above your pay grade. Margaret's expression didn't change, but Thomas saw her stiffen slightly. In her years of palace security, she had learned that the most dangerous situations often began with exactly this type of ominous warning. The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket, moving deliberately to avoid triggering any defensive reactions from the guards. He withdrew a different wallet from the one he had used earlier, this one bearing official government seals. My real name is not James Parker, he said quietly, and my interest in those archives has nothing to do with genealogy. The identification card the stranger handed to Margaret bore the seal of MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service. The photograph matched the man sitting before them, and the security features were unmistakably authentic. The name on the card read Agent David Thornfield. With a classification level that made Margaret's eyes widen, Thomas felt his worldview shifting as he processed this revelation. What had seemed like a straightforward case of unauthorized intrusion was clearly something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Intelligence operatives didn't typically attempt to break into royal archives without extremely serious reasons. Margaret studied the credentials carefully before looking up at the man now identified as Agent Thornfield. Her years of experience had taught her to be suspicious of anyone claiming official status, but these documents appeared genuine, and the agent's demeanor had shifted to match his revealed profession. "Agent Thornfield," Margaret said slowly, "if you're conducting official business, why didn't you follow proper channels? Intelligence services have established protocols for accessing royal archives when necessary." Thornfield's expression grew grave. "Chief Reynolds, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The normal protocols couldn't be used because we have reason to believe there's a security breach within the palace administration itself." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what the agent was suggesting were staggering. If there was indeed a security leak within the royal household, it could compromise not just the monarchy's privacy, but national security itself. "The documents I need to access relate to correspondence from the 1990s, Thornfield continued. "Specifically, letters and communications involving the then Prince Charles and various foreign dignitaries. We have intelligence suggesting that sensitive information from those communications has been leaked to hostile foreign governments." Margaret's mind raced through the implications. Such a leak could destabilize international relationships, compromise ongoing diplomatic efforts, and potentially expose state secrets that remained relevant decades later. The royal family's correspondence often contained candid assessments of world leaders and frank discussions of government policy. Why didn't your service coordinate with palace security through normal channels? Margaret pressed. "Surely MI6 has procedures for situations like this." Thornfield leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because we have evidence that someone with high-level access to palace communications is feeding information to foreign agents. Until we can identify the source of the leak, we can't risk exposing our investigation through official channels." The security office fell silent as the three palace staff members absorbed this bombshell revelation. Thomas found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about palace security. The idea that someone within their trusted circle could be betraying royal confidences was almost incomprehensible. "What makes you suspect these particular archives?" Margaret asked, her professional instincts taking over despite her shock. "Intelligence intercepts have referenced specific details from Prince Charles's correspondence during his separation and divorce proceedings," Thornfield explained. "Information that should only be accessible to a very small number of people with archive clearance? The timing of these leaks corresponds to someone accessing these exact files." Thomas realized the gravity of what they were dealing with. The dissolution of Charles and Diana's marriage had been a deeply sensitive period for the royal family, filled with private communications that could cause enormous damage if made public or shared with foreign intelligence services. Margaret made a critical decision. "Agent Thornfield, assuming your credentials are genuine, I'm willing to facilitate your access to the archives under strict supervision. However, I'll need verification from your superiors and proper documentation of exactly which files you need to examine." Thornfield shook his head grimly. "Chief Reynolds, I appreciate your caution, but time is critical. Our intelligence suggests that whoever is responsible for the leak plans to access those files again within the next 48 hours. If we don't intercept them in the act, they may destroy evidence of their previous activities." The agent pulled out a secure communication device and placed it on the desk. "I can arrange for immediate verification from the highest levels, but it will take approximately 2 hours to complete the security protocols. Meanwhile, the person we're tracking may already be making their move." Margaret found herself in an impossible situation. Protocol demanded extensive verification before allowing any intelligence operative access to royal archives, but if Thornfield was telling the truth, delaying could allow a traitor to cover their tracks and continue compromising national security. There's another complication, Thornfield added, his expression growing even more serious. Based on our investigation, we believe the person responsible for the leaks may be someone known to Camilla, the Queen Consort. The connection appears to stem from her previous social circles before joining the royal family. This revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. The suggestion that someone in Camilla's orbit might be involved in espionage against the royal family added layers of complexity that made his head spin. Such a betrayal would be devastating on both personal and political levels. Margaret's training kicked in as she processed these multiple threats simultaneously. Agent Thornfield, I need to understand your specific operational plan. How exactly do you intend to identify and apprehend this suspected traitor? We've set up surveillance on the archive access logs, Thornfield explained. Anyone who accesses the specific files we're monitoring will trigger alerts. We need to be positioned to observe and record their activities without alerting them to our presence. The plan required sophisticated coordination between MI6 and Palace security, the kind of operation that typically involved months of planning and approval from multiple government departments. The urgency Thornfield described meant improvising high stakes. Intelligence work in one of the most security-sensitive locations in Britain. Thomas spoke up for the first time since the agent's identity had been revealed. Sir, if someone with regular archive access is our target, they'll know the normal security patterns. Won't they notice unusual activity around the restricted sections? Thornfield nodded approvingly at the question. Excellent point, Officer Hartwell. That's exactly why we need to maintain the appearance of normal operations, while positioning surveillance equipment and personnel. The suspect must believe they're operating under routine conditions. Margaret realized they were being asked to participate in a counterintelligence operation of unprecedented complexity within the palace walls. The risks were enormous. If something went wrong, the scandal could damage the monarchy irreparably. But if Thornfield was correct about the ongoing security breach, the risks of inaction were equally severe. Agent Thornfield, Margaret said finally, I'm going to authorize limited cooperation pending verification of your credentials and operational authority. However, I reserve the right to terminate this operation immediately if I believe it poses unacceptable risks to royal security. Thornfield's relief was visible. Thank you, Chief Reynolds. I understand your position, and I assure you that MI6 has no interest in compromising palace security. Our only goal is to identify and neutralize the threat to national security that's been operating from within these walls. As they began planning the surveillance operation, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover secrets that would change everything they thought they knew about the people they had sworn to protect. The next 48 hours would test not just their professional skills, but their loyalty to the crown itself. The next 24 hours passed with agonizing tension as the surveillance operation took shape. Agent Thornfield had received verification from his MI6 superiors, confirming his authority and the legitimacy of the security threat. Hidden cameras were positioned throughout the archive corridors, and specialized recording equipment was installed to monitor access to the specific files under investigation. Thomas found himself working closely with the intelligence operative, learning sophisticated surveillance techniques he had never imagined would be necessary within the palace walls. Thornfield proved to be a consummate professional, sharing just enough information to facilitate their cooperation while maintaining operational security. The target will most likely make their move during the evening shift change, Thornfield explained as they reviewed the monitoring equipment. Past access patterns suggest they prefer times when security attention is focused on other areas of the palace. Margaret had coordinated with senior palace officials to ensure their operation wouldn't interfere with royal family schedules or visiting dignitaries. The delicate balance of maintaining normal operations while conducting counterintelligence work required careful choreography that tested everyone's skills. Evening approached on the second day. Tension in the security office reached a fever pitch. Multiple screens displayed feeds from the archive corridors, while sophisticated audio equipment monitored for any unusual activity. Thomas had never participated in anything approaching this level of surveillance complexity. At precisely 9:47 p.m., their vigilance was rewarded. A figure appeared on the main corridor camera, moving purposefully toward the restricted archive section. The person wore dark clothing and seemed familiar with the palace layout. Moving with confidence through areas that would confuse most visitors. "There's our target," Thornfield whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. "Notice how they avoid the main security checkpoints and use service corridors that aren't regularly patrolled." As the figure drew closer to the cameras, Thomas felt his heart sink. The person approaching the archives was someone he recognized, Dr. Elizabeth Whitmore, a historian who had been working with Royal Archives for over 3 years. She was known throughout the palace as a dedicated researcher with impeccable credentials and unlimited access to sensitive historical documents. "I know her," Thomas said quietly. "Dr. Whitmore has been working on official royal history projects. She has legitimate clearance for everything in those archives." Thornfield's expression grew grim. "That's exactly what makes her such an effective intelligence asset. Perfect cover, legitimate access, and the trust of everyone around her. She's been using her position to photograph and copy sensitive documents for transmission to foreign handlers." The screen showed Dr. Whitmore entering the restricted section with her authorized keycard. She moved directly to a specific filing cabinet, pulling out folders with practiced efficiency. From their surveillance position, they could see her using a sophisticated miniature camera to photograph document after document. Margaret activated her communication device to coordinate with guards positioned throughout the building. "All units, maintain positions but prepare for possible apprehension. Target is currently in restricted archive section C." As they watched Dr. Whitmore work, Thomas struggled with the reality of her betrayal. He had chatted with her countless times during her visits, discussing her research and sharing stories about palace history. The idea that she had been systematically stealing state secrets throughout their friendly conversations made him feel personally violated. "How long has she been doing this?" Thomas asked. Thornfield consulted his files. "We believe approximately 18 months. The intelligence she's provided has already compromised several ongoing diplomatic initiatives and given foreign governments insight into British negotiating positions they shouldn't possess. The monetary value of the information Dr. Whitmore had stolen was impossible to calculate. But the strategic damage to British interests could affect international relationships for decades. Her betrayal went far beyond simple document theft. She had been systematically undermining her own country's security. On the surveillance screens, Dr. Whitmore completed her photography session and began replacing the documents in their proper locations. Her movements were careful and methodical, clearly designed to leave no trace of her unauthorized activities. She had obviously done this many times before. "She's preparing to leave," Margaret observed. "Do we apprehend her now or follow her to identify her contacts?" Thornfield considered the options carefully. "We need to arrest her before she can transmit tonight's intelligence. But we also need her cooperation to understand the full extent of the network she's been feeding." The decision was made to intercept Dr. Whitmore as she exited the archive section, before she could reach any external communication devices or potential escape routes. Thomas and 2 other guards positioned themselves at strategic points while Margaret and Thornfield approached from the main corridor. Dr. Whitmore emerged from the restricted section looking perfectly calm and professional, just as she had hundreds of times before. Only now, everyone watching knew that she carried stolen state secrets in the sophisticated camera equipment hidden in her briefcase. "Dr. Whitmore," Margaret called out as she approached. "Could we speak with you for a moment?" The historian's reaction confirmed their worst fears. Instead of the surprised compliance they would expect from an innocent researcher, Dr. Whitmore's eyes immediately darted toward potential exit routes. Her hand moved instinctively toward her briefcase, as if protecting something valuable. "Of course, Chief Reynolds," Dr. Whitmore replied. but her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there moments earlier. Is there some problem with my access authorization? Thornfield stepped into view, and Thomas watched Dr. Whitmore's face carefully. The moment she saw the MI6 agent, her composed facade cracked completely. Her skin went pale, and her breathing became noticeably faster. Guilty recognition was written across her features. Dr. Whitmore, Thornfield said formally. I'm Agent Thornfield with MI6. We need to discuss your recent research activities and some concerns that have been raised about document security. For a moment, Thomas thought she might try to run. Dr. Whitmore's eyes flickered between the guards surrounding her and the briefcase containing her incriminating evidence. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized the trap had closed around her. I don't understand what you're suggesting, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I've been conducting authorized research under my standard clearance. Everything I've done has been completely legitimate. Thornfield opened his tablet and showed her surveillance footage from earlier in the evening. The high-resolution images clearly showed her photographing documents with unauthorized equipment, violating every protocol governing archive access. Dr. Whitmore stared at the evidence for several long seconds before her shoulders sagged in defeat. The weight of her deception and the magnitude of her betrayal seemed to finally overwhelm her carefully maintained pretense. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Long enough to understand the full scope of your activities, Thornfield replied. The question now is whether you're willing to cooperate with our investigation to minimize the damage you've caused to British security interests. As Thomas watched this confrontation unfold, he reflected on the unexpected turns his career had taken. What had started as a routine challenge to unauthorized access had revealed a sophisticated espionage operation targeting the very heart of British institutions. The Royal Archives, which he had always seen as repositories of historical documents, had become battlegrounds in a modern intelligence war. Dr. Whitmore's confession unfolded slowly in the secure interrogation room deep within the palace's administrative wing. As MI6's most experienced interrogator, Agent Thornfield skillfully guided her through the details of her 3-year betrayal, revealing a web of espionage more complex than anyone had imagined. It started innocently enough, Dr. Whitmore began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was approached at an academic conference in Prague by someone claiming to be interested in purchasing historical research for a private collector. The money they offered was substantial, and I thought I was just sharing harmless historical documents. Thomas stood guard outside the room. But through the monitoring system, he could hear every devastating detail. The revelation that Dr. Whitmore's betrayal had begun as what she believed was legitimate academic commerce made her subsequent descent into espionage even more troubling. The request gradually became more specific, she continued. They wanted documents from particular time periods, correspondence involving specific individuals. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was in too deep to back out. Thornfield's questioning revealed the sophisticated recruitment and manipulation tactics used by foreign intelligence services to turn academics into unwitting assets. Dr. Whitmore had been gradually compromised over months, with each successive request pushing ethical boundaries until she found herself fully committed to espionage. Who was your primary contact? Thornfield asked. A man calling himself Viktor Kozlov, though I'm sure that wasn't his real name. He claimed to represent wealthy Russian collectors interested in British royal history. The payments came through Swiss bank accounts that seemed legitimate at the time. Margaret, observing from the security office, felt the implications hitting her like physical blows. Russian intelligence had been operating through a trusted palace researcher for years, gaining access to the most sensitive royal correspondence and state documents. What specific information did you provide about current operations? Thornfield pressed. Dr. Whitmore's list was staggering. She had photographed and transmitted correspondence related to recent diplomatic initiatives, personal letters between royal family members discussing government policies, and historical documents that provided context for understanding current British negotiating positions. There were requests for anything related to the Queen Consort's previous social connections, Dr. Whitmore admitted. They seemed particularly interested in correspondence from before her marriage to then Prince Charles, especially letters involving people from her earlier social circle. Thomas felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The connection to Camilla that Agent Thornfield had mentioned wasn't about the Queen Consort herself being involved in espionage, but about foreign intelligence services using her historical associations to understand and predict current royal family dynamics. Did they ever ask about current palace security procedures? Margaret asked through the intercom. Yes, Dr. Whitmore replied, her shame evident. They wanted to know about guard rotations, access protocols, and which documents were considered most sensitive. I provided floor plans and security schedules that I had observed during my research visits. The scope of the security breach was breathtaking. Dr. Whitmore had essentially provided foreign intelligence with a complete blueprint for palace operations, making future espionage attempts infinitely easier to plan and execute. Thornfield leaned forward. Dr. Whitmore, are there any other palace employees or researchers who were approached by your handlers? Any indication that you weren't their only asset within the royal household? This question had been weighing heavily on everyone's minds. If Dr. Whitmore was part of a larger network, the damage to British security could be exponentially worse than what they had already discovered. I don't know of anyone else specifically, she answered carefully. But Victor mentioned that they had other friends who helped them understand British political and social dynamics. I always assumed he meant they had additional sources somewhere in government or academic circles. Margaret coordinated with MI5 and other security services to begin a comprehensive review of everyone with palace access. The investigation would eventually examine hundreds of employees, contractors, researchers, and regular visitors to determine if additional compromises existed. What was the most sensitive information you transmitted? Thornfield asked. Dr. Whitmore hesitated before answering. Last month, they specifically requested correspondence related to the king's private opinions about current world leaders, particularly his assessments of various heads of state that he had shared in personal letters to former prime ministers. That information could seriously damage diplomatic relationships if made public or used in negotiations. Thomas realized they were dealing with intelligence that could affect international relations for years to come. Foreign governments now possessed intimate knowledge of the British royal family's private opinions and assessments of global political figures, giving them unprecedented insight into British foreign policy perspectives. There's something else, Dr. Whitmore added reluctantly. Victor recently began asking about documents related to succession planning and the king's health information. I refused those requests because I knew they crossed lines even beyond what I had already done. The implications of these requests sent chills through everyone monitoring the interrogation. Foreign intelligence services had been attempting to gather information about the most fundamental aspects of British constitutional monarchy, seeking to understand and potentially exploit the transition of power within the royal family. Agent Thornfield spent several more hours extracting detailed information about communication methods, payment procedures, and the timeline of Dr. Whitmore's recruitment and activities. Each revelation painted a picture of a sophisticated, long-term intelligence operation that had successfully penetrated one of Britain's most secure institutions. Dr. Whitmore, Thornfield said, as the formal interrogation concluded, your cooperation tonight may help us limit the damage from your previous activities. However, you understand that you'll be facing charges under the Official Secrets Act and potentially treason statutes. As Dr. Whitmore was led away to begin the formal arrest and charging procedures, Thomas reflected on how completely his understanding of palace security had been transformed. What he had always considered routine document protection had actually been the front line of national security, with academic researchers and foreign intelligence services engaged in subtle battles for access to state secrets. Margaret gathered her security team for an emergency briefing. Starting immediately, we're implementing enhanced background checks for all researchers, revised document access protocols, and increased surveillance in all archive areas. This incident has exposed vulnerabilities we never anticipated. The investigation into Dr. Whitmore's activities would eventually lead to diplomatic protests, the expulsion of suspected intelligence operatives from several countries, and a complete overhaul of how sensitive historical documents were managed and protected. Her betrayal had touched every aspect of royal security operations. Thomas understood that his own role would never be the same. The simple task of checking authorization documents had revealed itself to be a critical component of national counterintelligence operations. Every researcher, every visitor, every request for access would now be viewed through the lens of potential espionage threats. As the immediate crisis resolved, a new reality settled over the palace. The age of innocence regarding historical research and academic access to royal documents had ended forever, replaced by the recognition that even the most trusted individuals could become weapons in modern intelligence warfare. 6 months after the arrest of Dr. Whitmore, the full consequences of her espionage activities continued to reverberate through British intelligence circles and international diplomatic relationships. Thomas Hartwell stood at his post in the newly redesigned security checkpoint, now equipped with advanced biometric scanners and surveillance technology that would have seemed like science fiction just months earlier. The Royal Archives had been completely restructured following the security review. Every document had been recatalogued with enhanced classification levels, and access procedures now required multiple authorization levels even for the most routine research requests. The casual atmosphere that had once characterized academic visits to the palace had been replaced by protocols more stringent than those used at military facilities. Agent Thornfield had become a regular presence in the palace, working with security staff to implement counterintelligence measures and train guards in recognizing sophisticated espionage attempts. His initial deception in approaching the archives had been forgiven in light of the critical threat he had helped expose and eliminate. The Russians are still trying to assess how much we know about their operation, Thornfield explained during one of his training sessions. Dr. Whitmore's arrest sent shockwaves through their intelligence networks, but they're probing for signs of what information she might have provided during her cooperation. Margaret Reynolds had been promoted to Deputy Chief of Palace Security, recognition of her decisive handling of the crisis. Her new responsibilities included liaison duties with MI5, MI6, and other security services that now maintained permanent coordination with Royal Protection Services. The investigation into Dr. Whitmore's activities had indeed revealed additional security concerns, though no other direct espionage agents had been discovered within the palace staff. However, background checks had uncovered several employees with financial vulnerabilities or foreign connections that made them potential targets for recruitment by hostile intelligence services. We've fundamentally changed how we think about insider threats, Margaret told Thomas during a recent briefing. The assumption that academic credentials and long-term employment guarantee trustworthiness has been replaced by continuous monitoring and verification procedures. Thomas had been selected for advanced security training, including counterintelligence awareness and surveillance detection techniques. His role in initially challenging Dr. Whitmore's unauthorized access attempt had been recognized as exemplifying the vigilance required to protect national security. The broader implications of the espionage case had reached the highest levels of government. Parliamentary committees had conducted classified hearings about security vulnerabilities in heritage institutions, leading to enhanced protection measures at museums, libraries, and historical archives throughout Britain. Dr. Whitmore herself had been sentenced to 12 years in prison under the Official Secrets Act. Her cooperation with authorities had prevented the maximum penalty, but the judge had emphasized the severity of her betrayal of institutional trust and national security. The case had become a landmark in British counterespionage law. The most troubling aspect, Thornfield reflected during one of their regular security reviews, was how effectively foreign intelligence exploited our own openness and academic traditions against us. They turned our institutional trust into a weapon. The international diplomatic consequences had been significant. Several suspected Russian intelligence operatives had been expelled from Britain, leading to reciprocal actions that had strained relationships between London and Moscow. The revelation that royal family correspondence had been compromised had complicated ongoing diplomatic initiatives. Thomas often thought about the morning when he had first encountered the man claiming to be James Parker. The routine nature of that initial interaction had concealed the beginning of one of the most significant counterespionage operations in recent British history. His simple insistence on following protocol had prevented what might have been an even more devastating intelligence breach. The new normal is permanent vigilance, Margaret had explained during staff meetings. Every interaction, every visitor, every research request must be viewed as a potential threat vector. We've learned that in modern intelligence warfare, academic institutions are battlegrounds as important as military installations. The technological improvements implemented throughout the palace included not just surveillance equipment, but sophisticated document tracking systems that monitored every access to sensitive materials. Artificial intelligence algorithms now analyzed patterns of document requests to identify suspicious activities before they could compromise security. Agent Thornfield's investigation had revealed that Dr. Whitmore's handlers had been preparing for even more ambitious operations. Intercepted communications suggested plans to recruit additional assets among palace staff and to expand their targeting to include other royal residences and government facilities. We prevented a catastrophic escalation, Thornfield had reported to parliamentary oversight committees. But the attempt itself demonstrates the sophisticated and persistent nature of threats against British institutions. Thomas found satisfaction in knowing that his unwavering commitment to security protocols had played a crucial role in protecting national interests. The investigation had vindicated every seemingly mundane procedure and regulation that governed access to sensitive areas of the palace. The lesson for security services throughout Britain had been sobering. Traditional approaches to protecting government information had proven inadequate against sophisticated intelligence operations that exploited institutional trust and academic legitimacy. The Dr. Whitmore case had become a template for understanding modern espionage threats. As Thomas stood at his post, monitoring the new security systems that now protected the royal archives, he reflected on how dramatically his understanding of his role had evolved. What had once seemed like ceremonial guard duty had revealed itself to be a frontline position in defending British democracy and constitutional institutions. The enhanced security measures had initially frustrated legitimate researchers and historians, but the academic community had gradually accepted the necessity of stricter protocols. Several universities had actually requested similar security reviews of their own historical collections after learning about the vulnerabilities that had been exploited at the palace. Every guard, every security officer, every person with access to sensitive information is now understood to be a potential target, Margaret emphasized during training sessions. The sophistication of modern intelligence operations means that anyone can become either an asset or a liability in national security terms. Thomas knew that his vigilance that Tuesday morning had prevented immeasurable damage to British interests. The routine challenge to unauthorized access had uncovered a years-long espionage operation and led to comprehensive improvements in institutional security throughout the country. As he watched new researchers submit to enhanced screening procedures, Thomas understood that the age of casual access to historical treasures had ended forever. The price of protecting democratic institutions in an era of sophisticated intelligence threats required Permanent sacrifice of the openness and trust that had once characterized academic research. The case of Dr. Whitmore had become a defining moment in understanding how traditional institutions must adapt to survive in an era of global intelligence warfare, where even the most trusted guardians of history could become agents of those who would exploit the past to undermine the future.